The world essentially operates on standards. They're really kind of in the background of almost everything we do. Standards by which we measure time, temperature, weight, how we look at actually fuel when we fuel our automobile, when we look at various products on TV and so on. Standards are literally behind everything that we do in life.
A basic layman's definition of standard, it's essentially a performance standard of what must the product do to be safe.
Standards are incredibly important in today's modern environment. With technology developing at the speed that it's developing, we want to ensure that products or systems that are brought into our communities are safe for the population to use or to build from. Standards give us a pathway to ensure that that product or that system is meeting a specific safety standard.
What's really important for UL in particular, which is different than other organizations, is that we produce what's called performance standards as opposed to prescriptive standards. And quite simply, and this is actually not as hard as it sounds, prescriptive standards is thou shalt design a product and do it. This is the way, that's it. Now, many times in my career, I've seen that European norms and standards are very prescriptive. You know, thou shalt do it this way. UL produces performance standards, which is that we focus in on what are those attributes that are important to identify for safety, since we're involved as an SDO with safety standards. We define through this evaluation of hazard-based safety engineering, or HBSE, is to define, the attributes of the hazard that this product represents. So let's say, for example, you have a self-propelled vacuum cleaner, right? And you evaluate this product, in foreseeable use. What are the things that could represent a foreseeable hazard? And it could be electric shock because it has energy storage of a battery inside of it. That we would have to actually evaluate the battery for risk of fire. There's electrical circuitry. You could look at electric shock hazard. There could be laceration and so on.
A simple example would be a fire door for a 2-hour rating. It basically says that you apply a flame to one side of the door, and it has to contain the flame to that side of the door for at least 2 hours. There's many ways you can get there, and that's why the standard is performance-based rather than prescriptive.
In the performance construct of a safety standard, we define, we kind of use this term, this boundary of safety that we would use within the standard based on what does the performance look like. Now, what's really interesting is that allows innovation inside of that box. So we never tell manufacturers how to innovate. So safety standards, which have a very exciting actually benefit to society, is that the development of performance-based standards promotes innovation. Prescriptive standards actually inhibit innovation because it restricts inventors from coming up with creative ideas. So that is one of the very exciting things about performance-based standards, and that's what UL does. We have over 1,500 safety standards in, believe it or not, 20,000 product categories.
Many of these standards and processes are actually written based on past occurrences or past disasters. When we look at occurrences where we've had large losses of life, the SAFE community has gotten together and developed a standard to ensure that we don't have similar failures in the future. So we can look at standards in today's sense as a history lesson on what has gone wrong in the past and how to prevent that from reoccurring in the future. It costs a lot of money to develop a standard. There's testing that is involved. There's the assemblage of the panel that's involved in the participation. So you don't create standards in a vacuum. There has to be a reason to create a standard. And usually that reason is a failure of a product or a failure of a system where people will start to say, we need to address that. So for an example, let's take hoverboards. It's a consumer product that came to the market. There was no regulation governing how a hoverboard should be built or tested. Yet after this product came to the market, we started to realize that we were having failures of hoverboards. Failures in the sense that led to fires. Fires that eventually led to a couple of fatalities. So here in the US, we have the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They have the authority to regulate consumer products within the US and enforce requirements. They started to realize a number of these incidents involving this product, so they reached out to UL, Underwriters Laboratories, to initiate some testing. UL took the steps to impanel a technical panel to start to review the product, start to review the results of the testing, and then start to outline some test criteria that future products coming into the US market would need to meet to ensure that now the hoverboard product that was coming to our market would be safe for children to use and for adults to use. So that's basically, all of a sudden you have the supply and demand. You have the need for a test standard because of a failure of a product or a system, which then is now the motivator to establish that test standard.
UL does not approve these products. Very important terminology, and this is part of education in general, is that UL certifies a product in its suitability to a standard. And now what that means is that if a standard has, let's say, a dozen or even 50 requirements embedded in the standard, the submitted product has to meet all of them. So, and if it does, and the product is fully evaluated as far as its manufacturing and so on, in its safety aspects, and it meets all those requirements, it is then certified by UL, which means we allow you, the inventor, to apply the UL mark.